Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be looking at a band I am familiar with and I do really quite enjoy. It's a band called the Woods of Ypres, I believe. Now I have heard this specific song before and I absolutely love this, but this song was a request by one of you, so you know I had to do it because I absolutely love this song. Now, for anybody who doesn't know who the Woods of Ypres are, or were, Woods of Ypres were a Canadian doom metal band from Windsor, Ontario. The band was formed in 2002 and initially consisted of 3 members, David Gold, Aaron Palmer and Brian McManus. However, in the 9 years that this band were active, they went through many lineup changes with no fewer than 20 different members passing through. So that's quite a considerable turnover of band members. David Gold, the lead vocalist and multi-instrumentalist, is the only constant member that has been in the band. However, on the 22nd of December 2011, David Gold was killed in a motor vehicle accident at the age of just 31, and that occurred just shortly before the release of their 5th and what would obviously be their final album. So that's really unfortunate. I mean, at the age of 31, you know, that's a really young age to die just before Christmas. It's quite tragic. And it is quite a shame because, like I said, I really like this band. And the track we're looking at is called I Was Buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which is very likely possibly one of their most famous tracks, I believe. But anyway, I've got the lyrics up here, but I don't really need it because I know the song by heart by now, because like I said, I do love this track. So yes, we'll jump straight into it and we'll talk about it as we go. Let's go with it, shall we? So I Was Buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery by the Woods of Ypres.
Disappear was the only way I could find relief when I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, alone and unceremoniously buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, when life was taken so suddenly. First I paid my respects to Glenn Gould, and then I visited the grave of Alexander Muir, next to Eaton's tomb. I hung my head and cried, looking for Joseph Mulgrew. I gave up and died.
Right, I'm going to pause that there for a minute because, I just adore this song. I mean, the guy had such a great voice, and the music was just, it was actually quite heavy considering how the vocals sound compared to how the music sounds. There's that really heavy sort of chugging guitar in the background. It just sounds so good. Now, the actual song itself, I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery. Now, Mount Pleasant Cemetery is actually a real place in Toronto, and it was a cemetery that was built in the 19th century for people who weren't of Christian or Catholic faith. And at the time, people who weren't either Christian or Catholic, around that time, they weren't allowed to be buried in Christian or Catholic graveyards, so they had to make a cemetery specifically for these people. So there's a bit of history about what Mount Pleasant Cemetery is. Now, the actual song itself, he's not actually talking about physically having died. He's sort of talking about, he's more suggesting that his old life had died in a way. And I'll sort of get more into explaining why in just a second. Now, lyric-wise, the song opens with that chorus, "I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, alone and unceremoniously. Buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, where life was taken from me." Then it goes into that first verse. "Our tree was full and green. I had to leave it. The sadness was overwhelming to be alone beneath it. The sun came down, hot and hard. I could never sleep. To disappear was the only way I could find relief." Now, that's basically, he's talking about, like, his partner, girlfriend, wife, whoever, has essentially left him. They've either died or, just left him, as it were. And obviously, "Our tree was full and green, I had to leave it." Our tree was full and green. It's probably the place where they used to sort of like meet up. It was their sort of romantic place where they used to sit together, talk, whatever. And he sees that tree so full of life, as he probably remembers her. But obviously, with her not being there anymore, he can't actually bear to be there. He can't bear to be under that tree that reminds him so much of the love that they used to share. So, he says, "The sadness is overwhelming to be alone beneath it. The sun came down hot and hard. I could never sleep. To disappear was the only way I could find relief." So, he had to leave that place. He had to, well, the way he uses that phrase, "to disappear was the only way I could find relief." So, he wanted, well, to disappear, essentially. Self-explanatory. Then it goes back into that chorus, although it seems to change slightly every single time he sings it. And he says, "When I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, alone and unceremoniously. Buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, where life was taken so suddenly." See, in the first version, it says where life was taken from me, and now it's when life was taken so suddenly. So there we go. And it went into the second verse. "First, I paid my respects to Glenn Gould. Then I visited the grave of Alexander Muir. Next to Eaton's tomb, I hung my head and cried. Looking for Joseph Mulgrew, I gave up and died." And then it sounded like it was about to go into the chorus again, because it says "when I was buried," but then it sort of faded out in a sort of echo. Now, with that second verse there, it says, "Paid my respects to Glenn Gould, visited the grave of Alexander Muir, next to Eaton's tomb, and Joseph Mulgrew." They're all people that are actually buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, So he is actually making reference to a real place and the real people that were in there. Excuse me. Excuse me. So he's going around visiting all these graves and tombs. And it says, "Next I went to Eaton's tomb, I hung my head and cried, and looking for Joseph Mulgrew, I gave up and died." Now, he's not talking about, obviously, physically dying. He wasn't just walking around and then just suddenly went dead. He's talking about, that old part of him sort of died and essentially disappeared. He cried so much. He was in so much heartache, but whilst he was there, he sort of not necessarily got over it, but he found some sort of relief and release from it, so he could actually let go of what he had. So that essentially the old version of him died, but he's still living. So like I said, I really love this song. I love the guy's voice. I love the musicianship for it. But let's carry on. From the And there we go. I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery by the woods of Ypres. Now, like I said, I really love that song. I think the guy had a fantastic voice. You know, I love the music. You know, it was heavy, and right towards the end there as well. In the final version of the chorus, you could hear harsher vocals, which he did use in other tracks, but not so much in this one. But you know, it's a brilliantly executed song. Musically, like I said, it's actually a lot heavier than it seems at first. If you just pay attention, to the guitars in the background, you know, they are actually pretty heavy, pretty chuggy, hefty guitars, you know. But when you listen to the actual vocals that go over the music, it doesn't seem that heavy of a track. So you know, it's quite deceptive in the way it's put together, but it just sounds brilliant, and it's such a good song as well. And I like what it's essentially talking about. It's like he's saying I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, so it's like I died, but I sort of came back as a new version of me. I mean, even the video itself kind of shows that, because towards the end of the video it shows him like shaving off his beard and shaving off his hair using the reflection of a tombstone, essentially becoming a new and different version of himself, you know, leaving the old version of himself behind in that cemetery and becoming this new person. As the song carried on, it said, the birds sang for the flowers in bloom, spring had just begun, recently fitted for a suit, now lying in a box. By summer I was gone, my remains stolen from the ground, my body never recovered, and I was never found, until now. So, you know, recently fitted for a suit, now lying in a box is essentially, you know, saying buried. But obviously he's not talking about physically being buried, he sort of buried this past version of himself. So, and that was like at the start of the spring, you know, he felt himself die, you know, his heart die, his will to live essentially had sort of faded. You know, he didn't want to go on without this woman. I said, by summer I was gone, my remains stolen from the ground, but my body was never recovered, and I was never found, until now. So it's taken him since the beginning of spring until summer, and you know, the old version of him is now gone. You know, you can't find that old version of him. Or, you know, it says my body was never recovered and I was never found. So, you know, they could never find that old version of him ever again. He was essentially a new person, so that version of him doesn't exist anymore. And then it went on to yet another different version of the chorus, and this is where the sort of harsher vocals were sort of in the background. It says, I was buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, alone and unceremoniously. Buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, between the monuments and trees, at the heart of the city, amongst the statues and fountains, a new life could begin, where the old path I ran came to an end. So, you know, the way he's put it there is sort of like the old version of himself was put to rest in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, and that's where his new life began, and his old life came to an end. And, you know, it's such a good song, and I love the way it was worded. I love the actual song itself. I love the way it sounded. You know, like I said, I like the guy's voice. You know, the actual music is, you know, like I said, heavier than it seems to start with. So, you know, it's a really, really good piece of music. It's a shame that David Gold actually passed away, because I'm sure, you know, they probably would have had a tremendously popular career had they been able to carry on. I mean, obviously they had a pretty good career already, given that they were just about to release their fifth album, so they're obviously doing something right, you know. And it's a shame that it couldn't have carried on, but you know, things unfortunately do go that way. But yes, I can't really think of much else to say about that track, so I'm going to leave that as it is. If anybody would like to suggest a track for me to react to, then please do so by all means. You can drop a comment in the comment section below, or message me on my Facebook on my Instagram, or you can even message me through my Patreon, where you could also help to support this channel and help me make future content for the channel, maybe even improve the quality of that content. The sun is moving, and it's coming right into my line of sight and right into my face. But anyway, just do know, if you do make a suggestion, it might take me a while to get around to it, since I get suggested so many tracks every single day that my list of tracks grows faster than I can record the videos. But I do write down every suggestion I get, so it will get done eventually. It's just going to take me a while to get around to it. Also, Metalhead Reacts is a proud supporter of the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, a British-based charity whose main goal is to put an end to hate crimes, mainly those that are aimed towards people of the alternative culture. Obviously, they want to put an end to all hate crimes, but alternative culture is their main focus, being that that's how they came into being. And it's something that I'm very passionate about, something that is very, very important to me, because it's something that doesn't get spoken about nearly as much as it needs to. Because, you know, every single day, all around the world, people are getting violently attacked because of their taste in music. You know, it's something that's never ever made sense to me. I mean, you don't attack people because they like different movies and TV shows to you, do you? So why would you attack someone because their taste in music is different? I mean, you don't beat someone up because they listen to Neil Diamond or ELO or, you know, that sort of thing. So why would you attack someone because they listen to heavy music? You know, it doesn't make sense. And sure, you know, people who listen to alternative music do tend to stand out a little bit, but that's still not an excuse for attacking someone just because they're different. I mean, attacking someone because of their way of life is a very essence of a hate crime. I've actually had people comment on these videos saying, "What are you talking about? This isn't a hate crime." Yes, it is. Attacking someone for their way of life because they don't fit into what you consider normal, you know, it's a hate crime, you know. And it's unacceptable that this is happening. I mean, people are getting violently attacked. People are getting hospitalised because of their taste in music. And it's unacceptable, but it never gets spoken about unless something tragic happens. You know. You see things like entitled Karen, the token entitled white woman, who complains about African Americans having picnics in a park. You know, you see that in the news. And, you know, nothing too severe really actually happened there. Obviously there is racism in there, and that is definitely a bad thing. But nothing too severe happened. But then you get people that are violently attacked, hospitalised, beaten to within an inch of their life because of their taste in music, and nothing gets said. It never gets spoken about. You know. And that's not good enough. You know, just because they listen to alternative music doesn't make it unworthy of coverage. You know, the only time this sort of thing gets spoken about is when a tragedy happens, like with the Sophie Lancaster incident. You know, her and her boyfriend walking home, minding their own business, get jumped by a group of people, 5 or 6 people. They get jumped and brutally attacked, beaten, kicked, stamped on, and, you know, they both ended up in comas. Thankfully, her boyfriend, Rob Melby, survived. He was in the coma for a few days. I think he came out somewhere around about a week. Sophie was in the coma for 13 days before she eventually died. And that's the last time that I can recall that such a thing was spoken about in the news, because it resulted in tragedy. However, I can guarantee since the time that she passed away, several other people have been attacked in such a way, you know, but they haven't died from the injuries. But no one knows about it because no one talks about it, because people don't think it's important enough. Yet people think it's important to talk about entitled Karen and her complaints about someone having a picnic in a public space. I mean, I'm not saying that is not a bad thing, but, you know, when someone's complaining about someone and someone's getting violently attacked and beaten to within an inch of their life, You know, I think the person who's getting beaten to within an inch of their life would probably like to have, you know, have it spoken about so people know that this is happening, so we can try and stop it from happening. And this is sort of what the Sophie Lancaster Foundation is about. They want to put an end to this. They want to stop this from ever happening again, and that sun is really, really bright. They want this to stop happening. They don't want to see another family go through what they went through when they had to watch their daughter slowly die over the matter of 2 weeks because some group of intolerant idiots couldn't deal with the fact that they liked something different, you know, because they didn't fit into what they considered normal, you know. And it's something, you know, I think it's really important that this gets spoken about more. It gets more recognition. So yeah, if you'd like to find out more about the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, there is a link to their website in the description below. You can go over there, find out what they're working on at the moment, find out what their goal is, because they can explain it so much better than I can. And if you can help them out in any small way, you know, if you can make a tiny donation to their on their website, or even one of these bracelets from their web store, you know, any small amount can make the biggest difference. Obviously, you don't have to, but if you can, that would be fantastic. Because the smallest amount can make the biggest difference, and the sooner we bring more attention to this, the sooner we can help to stamp out prejudice, hatred, and intolerance everywhere. But I'm going to leave that as it is for the time being. Thank you all very, very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.